Here we are at 10:45. I'm going to get started. So, good morning to everyone. Welcome to our session on measuring reduce, case studies in food service to demonstrate how reduction transforms systems. We have three panelists who will be sharing their case studies, and then from there, we'll have a brief period for questions at the end. So feel free to utilize the chat, pop your questions in there, and we'll be able to get to those. My name is Nicole Kenny. I'm the program manager for sustainable packaging at Cisco Systems. I'm coming today with a background in sustainable materials innovation across the textile and packaging industries, and I currently serve as an executive committee member for CRRA's Prevention, Reuse, and Repair Technical Council. I am honored today to moderate this panel. As you will see, our amazing speakers are seasoned professionals. They're committed to improving climate change through their work to shift the paradigm of food services and to reduce food and packaging waste. We are going to kick off our case studies with Stephen Finn. So if you move to the next slide, I'll tell you that Steve is the Vice President of Sustainability and Public Affairs at LeanPath. One more slide. There we go. He recently returned from COP27 in Egypt, where he was engaged in supporting the global effort to make the connection between food waste and climate change. As part of his work, he made a commitment to the UN's 123 pledge on behalf of LeanPath to enable food service providers to prevent an amount of food waste equivalent to 50 million meals by 2025. Steve also made a personal commitment to educate hundreds of citizens on the scope and scale of the food waste challenge by 2025 through his courses and webinars, as well as a blog. After that, we'll be hearing from Sue Beets Atkinson. So on the next slide, you'll see Sue is the Global Vice President of Sustainability at SBM Management Services. She's LEED certified, a true advisor, and a certified sustainable resource management professional, With more than 28 years of resource management and recycling experience, she has successfully designed and implemented many large and complex recycling programs for a multitude of Fortune 500 companies throughout the United States. And finally, on the next slide, you'll see Joni A. Burns. Joni's an environment, health, safety, and sustainability manager for Amgen. She has 27 years of environmental policy and planning experience, working with a wide range of public and private sector organizations in the US as well as internationally. Joni was involved in the development of some of Europe's first EPR directives, including WEEE, which is the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive. That's a mouthful. As well as the ELV, End of Life Vehicle Directive. So with that, let's jump into Steve's work at LeanPath.
Great, well, thanks, Nicole. Appreciate it. Great to be here with everyone talking about the reduce portion of the hierarchy and focusing on food waste reduction today. And the title of this is Moving to Zero Food Waste in Food Service, and this really important theme of scaling prevention for transformational change. So next slide, please. So just a little bit about LeanPath very quickly. We focus on measurement-focused technology solutions to prevent the occurrence of food waste in the food service sector. We are a certified B Corporation. We are headquartered in Oregon. We have offices in the UK and China and operate in over 40 countries around the world. And we are focused on making food waste prevention and measurement everyday practice in the world's kitchens. Next slide, please. So I always like to talk about this topic and to start off by saying that reducing food waste really matters, right? We're in the decade of action, as a lot of people know, for the Sustainable Development Goals, and we're off track on the majority of them, right? And the food system is one of the greatest levers that we have to accelerate progress toward the goals, and due to the critical, the linkage aspect of food to all of the other SDGs, and so. By reducing food waste, we can benefit all of these other goals, right? We can reduce our use of water. We can reduce our impact on soils and land. We can reduce our impact on forests and biodiversity loss. So this is really a critical driver for us all to focus on as part of broad sustainability strategies and waste reduction plans. So food system really critical, and food waste reduction really critical too. So next slide, please. And to get at that a little bit, as many of you probably know, food waste prevention really important for the food service sector. One of the biggest things that they can do to combat climate change, and I think probably many of you have seen Project Drawdown recently ranking food waste reduction as the single most important thing that organizations can do to combat climate change. Next slide, please. So really important for food service to engage in food waste reduction, and yet really interestingly, there are a number of drivers in food service operations that actually tend to lead them to actually have a lot of waste in operations, right? And principally that is a result of using food to manage risk, right? No culinary person wants to run out of food ever. We like the appearance of bountiful buffets. We tend to over merchandise. We have a when in doubt, throw it out mindset regarding food. So in many ways, we run operations such that we waste a lot of food, and that is something that needs to change and that we are trying to accelerate very quickly at Beth. Next slide, please. So food waste prevention, really a key thing for operations to engage in for a number of reasons. It is the highest impact solution on the hierarchy, as we know. And one of the best ways that food service operations can engage in this is through the practice of daily measurement. Next slide. Also, as Refed recently pointed out, tracking of food waste is really the highest leverage aspect of prevention that food service operations can do, resulting in huge savings. So we'll get into some of that detail right now. Oh, next slide, sorry. So to get a little bit more granular here, what's the current reality in food service, right? And costs are up right now, as everybody I think knows. Labor, very difficult, shortages, labor costs are up too. And at the same time, you have this really challenging operating environment. Consumers are also demanding more sustainable practices from food service operations. So it's a really tough environment right now, which is going to make food waste reduction efforts even more important. Next slide. So from a financial standpoint, efficiency is really important here, right? Financial food service operations are really throwing money away through food waste. Our studies show that the typical food service operation wastes anywhere from 4 to 10% of purchases. So if you think about that, if you have $1 million food spend, you're wasting anywhere from $40,000 to $100,000 right off the bat, right? And obviously there's great environmental and social cost that goes along with that too. Next slide. Obviously, in this inflationary environment, that wasted food is even more expensive too. Food prices are up sharply right now, and so that makes food waste even more of a drag on the bottom line. Next slide, please. And as I said before, the labor used to prepare that food also more expensive today, and just the difficulty of getting labor is also important too. So no one wants to spend time producing food that is ultimately going to go to waste. Next slide. And the climate connection, obviously very strong between food waste as well. The food system accounts for 34% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Food loss and waste alone account for 8 to 10%. So really important to address it from a climate standpoint. As we know, if food waste were a country, it would rank third behind the US and China as the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. So huge opportunity to benefit climate and emissions in particular through food waste reduction. Next slide. And so the good news is we talk about this often, that food service operations really can take control of their food waste, right? They can cut their costs, take back about 2 to 8% on purchasing costs. They can make their labor force more efficient. They can lower their disposal fees. Another really important one, they can engage their staff. We know that employees really want to engage with companies that are focused on authentic sustainability efforts and mission. And they can become more resilient too, to adapt to changing conditions that such as were thrown at food service operations through the pandemic too. So next slide, please. And I also like to talk about this in terms of, it's really a time for action right now in food service to address food waste. And this is really important to address from the standpoint of leadership, right? We need transformational thinking right now. We need organizational leaders to step up and break the paradigms, as was mentioned before, and really take aggressive, action-focused steps to address food waste reduction and to back them with measurement-focused reporting as well. Next slide. And to do that, obviously we'll get huge triple bottom line benefits. We'll talk about this in the perspective of moving up the hierarchy and shifting from a diversionary mindset to one focused on prevention to maximize the benefits that you can get, both from the bottom line standpoint. If we prevent food waste from occurring, we get all of the benefits all along the supply chain from, we don't have to produce that food in the first place, distribute it through the system, and ultimately move it from farm to fork to landfill where it'll have additional negative effects, right? So maximizing the benefit through preventing the occurrence of food waste in the first place. And then in so doing, operations can also use this as a lever to move toward recovery programs as well for excess food that is occurring in operations today. Next slide. So this is really an issue of visibility. LeanPath, one of our discoveries, over 18 years ago, was that food waste was the elephant in the kitchen. It was very large, but often unaddressed. And a lot of this stems from our culture of abundance related to food. And so we address this by making food waste visible in operations through a process of daily measurement, through data, and enabling organizations to harness that data and lead change. Next slide, please. So also, I often hear that food waste is challenging for food service operations, right? There's a perception that measurement is difficult and measurement is expensive. And that is something that we work to flip that narrative, right? For us, measurement is one of the easiest things that we do. Data is prolific and easy to analyze in our system, and it enables organizations to engage their staff and get excited about food waste reduction. So we're addressing these issues of, these perceptions of food waste being difficult to measure, hard to analyze the data, hard to engage staff, flipping that and really making this a strong point for operations to address. Next slide. So we make this easy. We have a process called Track, Discover, Drive. The process starts with tracking each case of food waste in operations, discovering the prevention opportunities that you have through that data, and then leveraging that data and harnessing it through behavior change efforts to prevent the occurrence of food waste going forward, and to optimize what you can do with what's occurring in the operation today in the here and now. Next slide. And so we do this with a suite of tools that will fit each size kitchen operation, anywhere from tablet-based mobile solutions on the left side for lower volume kitchens, to benchtop solutions for mid-range operations, all the way over to floor scale solutions to really high volume operations. And so through this process of measurement and analytics, we're raising this awareness of food waste in the operations and setting this foundation for changes to reduce it going forward. Next slide. And it's really exciting to see this. There's really instant impact that you get through tracking each case of food waste. Staff really see the impact at the end of each transaction. We extrapolate the cost of, in this case, this tray of boneless chicken. We will extrapolate the financial cost of that over the course of a year. So employees can see what the impact of that is if that were to occur every day, as it often does in the case of food service operations. And we also pair that with the environmental impact too. So staff see the financial impact, they see the environmental and social costs of food waste every day, and it really gets them thinking about their impact and how they can drive change. And so we're basically putting them on the front line of efforts to prevent food waste and connecting them to the global food waste challenge. Next slide. Great insights come from this. Operators can see the impact of that data. They can understand where food waste is coming from, what's generating it, what are the top reason codes for their food waste, what are the trends in waste in their operations, and that all of that leads to a focus on, okay, what can we do as a kitchen staff to prevent this going forward? What operational changes can we make, and how can we change our behaviors going forward to prevent that waste? Next slide. We also help leverage those insights with photography. As we all know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So those, this range of photos that we can provide really gives great context, helps chefs to identify the root causes of food waste. Typically, a chef can look at any one of these images and they know exactly where that food waste came from in their operation, how it emanated, and it's a great point for having conversations with employees about how to prevent it going forward. Next slide. So we like to talk about this in terms of moving beyond measurement. So using this data, harnessing these opportunities from the data to make these changes, to lead to action, to reduce waste in the here and now, to optimize what's occurring today and to prevent it going forward. So this is about harnessing that data and then looking for the opportunities to act on it. Next slide, please. And so we have a range of tools that are used for this, all kinds of reporting, all kinds of transaction analysis, and really great features that can help drive behavior change, such as alert features. So if as a chef, you would like to see every case of filet mignon waste or lobster waste in your operation, obviously because those are expensive, anytime one of those is scaled out, you can get an email sent to you, and then you can go and have an immediate conversation with one of your staff members. And have a productive conversation, engage in, okay, this is expensive. How do we prevent that from the future? What can we do with that today, right? How can we repurpose that? And you can also set goals too. So if eggs, for example, are skyrocketing in price, you can set a 3-week goal in your operation to track the flow of egg waste across the operation and take efforts to reduce that going forward. Next step, next slide. You can also set these goals at the enterprise level too, and all this reporting kind of rolls up across the organization. So you can compare results between sites, and you can set goals across sites too for really high level items. So it's a great way to look at progress and measure progress across the operation on food waste reduction on a number of fronts. Next slide. And one other thing, in addition to tracking and measuring food waste in operations, we have tools that now allow food service operations to engage consumers as well. We have a product called Spark, which allows these operations to engage their patrons in plate waste and engage them in steps that they can take to reduce food waste too. So it's really a full service approach to addressing food waste in operations, both in the kitchen and at the plate waste level. Next slide. And so just to wrap this up, bring it to a close. So, engaging in a program like this and with a focus on preventing your food waste, you can retain value. You can obviously get financial savings, cut your food waste by anywhere from 50 to 70% within a year, typically. Take back 2 to 8% of your purchasing costs, cut your disposal fees, as we said before, stop wasting labor. So great financial gains. Next slide. And of course, you can reduce your impacts on the environment too, right? Reduce your footprint, save water, keep those meals in the system, really importantly, free up resources to address root causes of social challenges. Next slide. And also, as I mentioned before, really important, these programs are a great way to engage your staff, connect your frontline food service workers to the Global Food Waste Challenge. And again, employees are really excited about this. They'd love to be working for authentic mission-focused organizations, right? There's a lot of meaning behind this, obviously. Next slide. And as I mentioned before, we provide a lot of data through our tracking process, but really important too is that the technology is powered by behavioral science. So we are using those tools like goals and alerts and others to amplify the power of that data and really create a culture of food waste prevention in kitchens, really making food waste prevention part of organizational DNA. Next slide. So just to wrap this up, prevention can't really happen without measurements effectively. Those data insights are really the basis for change, really important to recognize that, and to help organizations change their operations and their strategies going forward to reduce waste. Next slide. And to do this, really important to recognize that this is a solvable challenge, reducing food waste in operations. Preventing that from occurring is really essential for creating sustainable zero waste operations. And really, it's a great time for leadership to really step up in new ways with a new paradigm, and really focus organizations on making the commitment to bold plans to reduce food waste in operations, optimally to prevent it at the start, and also to engage all employees and back this effort with transparent reporting as well. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That was great. I saw a few questions come through, but I'm going to hold them off until the end. And why don't we jump in with Sue and the work at SBM?
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for having me. I look at this, next slide, please, as looking at how do we quantify things. And so I think Stephen's really helps us identify how to save money and eliminate food waste. And so I'm always looking at that point of generation. Next slide, please. And with that, we've got to figure out, how do we track this? How do we include this into our diversion program? How do we help it meet our corporate goals? And so simplicity is sometimes better for you than overcomplicating things. It gets overcomplicated, very few people want to help support it and help you track your numbers. And so through the TRUE program, we've been tracking diversion for a number of years, but the minute we look at reduction and the reduction of food waste or food containers, we've got to figure out, because what it does is it changes our diversion if we no longer generate it. So we figured out a way through the TRUE program to create a zero waste diversion. And what that does is it takes your reduce and your reuse and your recycling, and you finish off your diversion, but then you have another section, because most companies are looking at, how do I reduce my waste, not add to it? And so this is a really great way of simplistically tracking that information. Next slide, please. And so with that said, it truly is, where is that reduction? So we're going to go back to the food waste, or actually food containers, right? And so years ago, you used a durable good. And then labor got expensive and nobody wanted to pay for the containers. So then you went to disposable containers. We threw those all away. We saw that weight in the landfill. Then eventually we moved to, where applicable, compostable containers, which we're still seeing that weight, but now it's in the compost or the recycling program. Well, as we've worked our way away from that, there's a lot of companies that are starting to circle back to using durable goods. Now, in some systems, you're using or renting an item, useful, boomerang. There's a few out there that help you. They help with a reusable container. But in some applications, there's businesses that have actually, outfitted an entire cafeteria, break rooms, whatever, with all durable goods and no disposable or compostable items. And so how do you go about tracking that information? Next slide, please. And so what we do with that is, and this is very simplistic, left side is including reuse and recycling, the right side is adding in reduction, and it creates a different increased total generated weight. That's why we use it in a solid waste report. We separate the two, and it helps you improve your overall diversion. Do you guys see that? And so what that does is, okay, now I got to figure out, oh my God, how many meals are sold? How much the weight? How do we simplify? Next slide, please. And so what we've done is, number one, if you're working on any kind of certification, number one, you've got to start out with the documentation, the how this works and how I got those numbers, so that you can quantify in writing. And I highly recommend that if you're working with, one of the food service providers on this, that you not only get the person's name, but also the title, because job positions change, job people change. You might have all the information and then you go back quantify it again, and that person's left the company and I got to start all over again. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to have it documented as such. Next slide. And so what we did at one of our clients is they went to all durable goods, silverware, coffee cups, water cups. Even you can see the sugar containers are in dispensers instead of packets. And so with that, we worked with the food service provider to, number one, they themselves were tracking how many items they were leaving in break rooms. So I've got a list of what comes out of that break room or what was used for the month. Next slide, please. And then we also were tracking exactly what was used in the cafeteria. We went and put together all of the different weights and said, okay, most people walk away with a plate or a bowl and 2 pieces of silverware, whether that's a knife and a fork, a spoon and a knife, whatever the case may be, and typically a coffee cup and a water cup. So then we figured out, okay, we know exactly how many ounces are generated for one meal. And at the end of the month, they just gave us a total use inside the building. And at this facility, actually, they had none available disposable or compostable containers. I even went up to get a Danish and she's like, I have a napkin, I'll take it. So it's the right thing to do. But it helps with not only quantifying the volume of material now that has been reduced, because we don't want to lose our diversion if we do better. And then on top of that, we're actually quantifying savings. Now, this does not include labor. This physically is just avoided disposal cost. It goes into the exacts of any kind of containers, and again, does not include labor. Labor got expensive. In some instances, you go too far to the spectrum that says everything is durable. I mean, tea diffusers and everything else. That's probably too far. You've got to find that happy spot that it's not overly expensive and you can find a balance, because we are running a business and trying to quantify things. Next slide, please. And so this is sort of a list of us figuring out the specifics of every single item that was used. We did not take into account the savings of the compostables that were used. We literally did a clear slate because we know that nothing's going into the landfill. It is all going through the kitchen and the dishwashers. And next slide, please. So that's a large part of the tracking and the thought process behind using durables. In addition, with everybody going back to work, we know that we went completely opposite direction with everything being not only a disposable, but a disposable with a wrapper on it. So we've created more waste with the pandemic. So we're starting to work our way back to, we're back to work. How many, how long are we going to keep those those compostables and different items that are wrapped in something? But it's just something to think about. And next slide. And so different ways to look at your break areas. This perfect server is pretty neat that you buy your sugar packets in bulk and you feed the machine and then you push a button for how many creamers you want or sugar. Also want to recommend getting away from these small little disposables to the pumps. Now I travel a lot and I'm in hotels a lot and I'm like, why are you still using in some applications the little creamers when you could go back to a pump that is actually a reusable pump and I can recycle the container. Next slide, please. And so again, purpose is really of that documentation, both how the process works, how you're getting your numbers and adding them into your diversion to make a difference. Next slide. And thank you very much. Look forward to any questions.
That was great, Sue. Thank you. Joni, let's hear from you now.
Sounds good. And I'm very jealous of the company that has gone to 100% durable. That is my goal, and that's what you'll hear about here today. So if you want to go to the next slide, just very quickly by way of introduction, my name is Joni Burns. I'm an EHSS manager at Amgen. We are a independent biotechnology company based in Thousand Oaks, California. That's what you're seeing behind me, is right behind our facility here. This is our corporate headquarters. We started in 1980 and we have since grown to be one of the world's largest. We have about 24,000 employees in just over 100 companies. And we do have a very strong ESG reputation. We've been on the Dow Jones Sustainability World and North America indices going on 8 years. And we have very aggressive sustainability goals, which includes a 75% reduction in waste sent to landfill, which falls on me. So I'm going to talk to you about two very specific initiatives I've done at our corporate headquarters that aim to reduce, to eliminate those single-use disposables. So if you go to the next slide, you can actually skip it. It's just the intro to our paper cup elimination program, which is the first one. And as we've been hearing, measurement matters. And what Sue is talking about is how do we measure something if we eliminate it? Well, we look back at 2019, that was the baseline year of our 2027 sustainability goals as a starting point. We were using close to 2 million paper cups on our campus. Even after COVID, actually after COVID or during COVID, it went up. As Sue mentioned, we were going back to all the disposables. We have reduced the number of people on our campus, but we were still using an inordinate amount of paper cups. And even though we switched to a cup that was both compostable and recyclable, our recycling behavior left a little bit to be desired. And if you give that a person a choice of a disposable, inevitably some of it is still going to end up in the landfill. A little bit of a leverage that I had is after 45 painful years with the same landfill owning waste hauler, our city finally rebid the contract to another company hauler who was honest to us about bioplastic, quote unquote, bioplastics. We knew they weren't getting composted. They said, we're not going to accept them. So we had to get rid of our quote unquote plastic cup covers anyways. And that was a great way for me to kind of push this issue with my leadership. If you go to the next slide, this wasn't the first time at bat for me. I have been trying very, very hard to eliminate cups. Up until recently, the best we could do is initiatives to reduce, and those were often very temporary measures. They lasted for a bit, but they were incredibly resource intensive, and they never got us to where I wanted to be. And there's a lot of words on the slides. A couple of slides I'm not going to talk to too much. You'll be able to read them afterwards because I just want to keep moving, but you'll see all the stuff we tried. And then if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, finally got to a point where people said, okay, maybe we can look at this. And the way I got there was not only showing them all that data, but also coming up with what we thought was just, we've answered every question kind of a solution. So one of the big pushbacks I got is, well, if you get rid of paper cups, you have to give people an option. Well, we bought every single person a very nice reusable cup. These were not cheap, and said, we're going to give these to you. But then a really important aspect, I would encourage every single person, if you've not heard of Fill It Forward, Google it, because what we did is we partnered with Fill It Forward, an amazing organization. I'll tell you a little bit more about it, but bottom line is it's a way to engage people on that reuse journey. There's a little QR code that you put on your cup. You scan it every time you fill up. It tracks your reuse, and there's also a charitable aspect to it. So that was a huge, really great aspect of this to get the engagement piece. We also put up visitor mugs. You can see they're labeled and they say wash and return after use. We made those available in very limited quantities. So if we had visitors or if, God forbid, someone forgot their cup, they'd have an option. They weren't left with nothing. We had great signage, visitor mug parking only. And then phased implementation. We have 35 active buildings. We did this building by building over the course of several weeks where I was literally handing every single person their cup and engaging with them and telling them the story and telling them why we're doing this. So very resource intensive, and I'll get to more of those details in the next slides, but go ahead to the next one. I do also want to say that going back to that, we feel like we really got it right. We looked at every option. We looked at all sorts of different ways of doing this. And I won't read through this, but the bottom line is, no matter how much you think you've thought of everything, you have never thought of everything. And excellence should not suffer in the quest for perfection. Absolutely. Do all of that troubleshooting, think of the worst possible scenarios, think of every base that you could possibly cover, but don't let one potential glitch prevent you from moving forward. And you're never going to get it perfectly right, but really think it through as thoroughly as you can. Try to anticipate all of those problems and then move forward. And so that's what we did. If you go to the next slide, we did the big launch. That shot on the left is a screenshot of the Fill It Forward app. Like I mentioned, every time you scan your QR code, when you fill up, you scan it, it tracks your individual impact and the collective impact. You can form a group. We formed a group of Amgen Thousand Oaks so we could see collectively the waste and water and carbon we were saving by not using disposables. That second one is an accord. We had these big banners that said, I pledge to reuse by accepting this cup. I know this is a commitment. And we had everyone write their name on their cups, including all the way up to our C-suite, our CEO, and put them on that, that banner to really say, listen, this is a contract. This is a commitment that we're all going to get in on. That far right, that's our director of facilities and our director of catering, along with myself at the first day of handout. We did this for over 3 months, individually handing out cups to people. So it was a big investment. And the whole idea is to really get that engagement people, to get that buy-in. Next slide. Even though we, so this is where we, just to show you some of the visitor mug setups, they're small, but like I say, I thought I had all my bases covered. I've got the no, visitor mug parking only. I've got great signage saying you got to wash your cups and mugs. And if you go to the next slide, I still got questions. I got a lot of emails as we were rolling this out saying, wait a minute, how come I didn't get a cup? And it's like, well, did you read an email? It's not your turn. Or, hey, how come there's no cups in the break room? Well, because we eliminated them. And so some people are going to miss it. Some people miss the point. I had several people who are now remote workers ask me if I could mail them their cup. And, I was kind of like, I think you probably have a few reusable cups at home already. The point is we eliminated paper cups on campus. And that goes back to that kind of 6-second soundbite that you've got to educate people about why you're doing something. And then we also had some real logistical issues. What about new employees? I did try to incorporate this into our new hire orientation, and there was kind of like, well, who's going to pay for it and how do we do it? So bottom line is just the new hire orientation as a message to say, if you come to an Amgen campus, and it's not only ours, more and more are moving to paper cup free campuses, just be prepared with your own reusable cup or water bottle. Large meetings were a challenge. We aren't, because I'd like to be a zero waste catering facility. So if we have a meeting of 200 to 300 people, they still actually have to use paper cups for the coffee service unless that individual group planning the meeting wants to pay to rent the reusables. I'm working to change that. I'd like to really have us be true zero waste catering. And then, as I mentioned, that cup distribution was just, I mean, it consumed my life for many, many months. I loved every minute of it because I got to interact with every single person and see their eyes light up as I explained this program and the meaning of it. They're behind their masks, just sort of popping up and saying, wow, that's a really cool thing. And many, many people were and are very proud of us for taking this step forward. But like I say, you're always going to have, the few people who think this is ridiculous, or why didn't I get more free cups? Those, you're always going to have that. And you've just got to be prepared to respond to it, and to respond hopefully in a not a snarky or sarcastic way. Sometimes I got really, really annoyed with people, and I just had to remember that not everybody lives in our, kind of waste reducing world. And again, like I say, once we kind of educated people about the reason behind this, there was a lot of great support. More challenges. Next slide was with the visitor mugs. This is going to show a little bit of dirty laundry, but even, the picture on the right, there's a sign that says, wash your cups, don't leave them in the sink, and there's 2 dirty cups in the sink. There will always be those people. The picture in the middle, we actually found someone was hiding a cup under a sink in a bathroom to make sure that they had one of the cups to use. So, again, I don't want this to reflect poorly. Overall, the project has been, or the initiative has been hugely successful. We haven't had a lot of problems. My point of sharing this, people, is these are very visible examples, and they can, you can have, did have a facility manager that kind of seemed like, well, why are we doing this? We probably, don't let these little tiny one-offs, be the image of the program. You really have to keep reminding people how good this is. You have to remind people of that 1.8 million paper cups that you've eliminated, of that over $100,000 of savings for perhaps, the extra bit of labor for our environmental services people to wash the cups. So, like I say, you're always going to have kind of those little glitches, the things that don't quite work. But, as long as you've thought things through, you can be successful in something that is a relatively big undertaking in this case. So now I'm going to move on to reusable takeout containers, and this is an ongoing initiative. Sue mentioned Boomerang. That's the model we're using, and I'll give you some background. If you go to the next slide, this is again starting with the data, the why. Oh, first of all, this is an old picture. Don't judge me by these containers. This is our old signage. We have much better signage, and we have 3 bins now for compost. The point of showing this, and I know they're both full, but that's a trash and a landfill, or a landfill and a recycling container in both those pictures. Not only do the waste streams look absolutely identical, both of those pictures are taken immediately outside 2 of our restaurants on site. So people were getting to go and not going. And so my point is, and I'll circle back to this later in the discussion, is it's not just okay, let's just give them a reusable container. Why are people even taking it to go in the first place? So go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, the background on this is 30 metric tons of single-use disposable waste used in our restaurants. The metrics are very important in making the business case. Another added bonus to this pilot that I'm doing is because of our aggressive 2027 sustainability goals, we had some funding to support projects. So it wasn't just right immediately on our facilities people to say, you're going to pick up the tab for this pretty aggressive program that we're not quite sure will work. We've got a year of funding to see if we can do a pilot, see if we can make it work out any of the glitches before you have to pick up the tab. Ultimately, there's going to be a money savings by not purchasing these disposable items, but surely there's costs in implementation and as we work out some of the glitches. So next slide. We looked at several options, just like we did with cups. We really explored all the different options, including a third party, you know, like the Aussie containers with a reverse vending machine, or in-house through our current food service provider. Return deposit, something like either whether it's a cash or a token or their badge versus just giving them the containers. I felt very strongly that some kind of an incentive to return the containers was absolutely critical, but ultimately our leadership just wanted to go ahead with, we're just going to switch to reusable container and expect people to bring them back. That was based on our food service provider doing that with one of their other customers, who is a very environmentally conscious, progressive company. Their culture, I think, was a lot further along than we are. We're getting there, but I was pretty dubious about whether we could be as successful as they were. But what we did do is say, we're going to plan for a 20% loss. We'll do it in one of the 2 cafes and then see if we want to roll it out. The pilot was supposed to last 6 weeks. We're on month 6 and we're still doing it because we're issues. And if you go to the next slide, the key issue is the containers are not, First, again, pulling out all the stops. We did big launch. We did a lot of communication. I had, again, my director of facilities there. We did, every day for the first week in that cafe, I was there for every breakfast and every lunch telling people, hey, don't forget you can return your containers. We thought we had it right. We had great branding. You can see my nice, better signages on our outdoor containers. And then if you want to go to the next slide, the big challenge for us is we're not getting the containers back. Our loss rate is 70% of the containers aren't coming back. I'm not convinced, well, we're not seeing them really in the trash and recycling. It's, it's not, I hate to tell you, I told you so, but, I really think people are taking them home. They're very nice containers. And I joked at the very early stages that once everyone gets their full set and maybe a full set for their kids, then they'll start returning them. The other thing we are seeing is people are stockpiling them. I'll occasionally see someone walking back to one of the restaurants with a stack of 6 of them, or I'll walk by someone's office and there'll be a stack of 6 of them. So there's that, but really they are going away. And part of that is because of some of the things we didn't think about. So if you go to the next slide, we did make some adjustments as far as like just educating people and reminding people, hey, these are returnable, because they weren't labeled. And so if you go to the next slide, one of the things we're doing is labeling every single container. If you see on that lower right, this is Amgen property, it's reusable, it must be returned. Some people just didn't really think of that. They, like I say, we're not seeing huge volumes in the trash and recycling, but we are finding them. I drafted a letter every single one of our vice presidents sent out to all of their teams to say, this is a commitment that we've made. This is Amgen property. You really need to do it. We also, because of the pilot factor, going back to that, if you give people an option, because we only did it at one cafe, it wasn't kind of socialized. It wasn't rolled out throughout the whole campus. And we only had those drop boxes in a certain number of places. And so that was something that people, it kind of, there could cause some confusion, or maybe give people an option other than just going with the program. But then the other aspect of this is a cultural piece. So if you go to the next slide, one of the things that we've just recently launched is going back to, what I was telling you about people dining in, or taking it to go, but not going, is, well, why aren't they just using a durable, reusable porcelain plate in the first place? Partnering with our wellness program, partnering with our occupational health, and adding the messaging of this is actually good for you. Getting our leadership to tell their staff, we want you to take a break. We want you to sit down and have a meal. We want you to, you're back on campus after COVID, reconnect with your colleagues. And so really, taking that messaging and broadening it out just from the sustainability piece, which is actually absolutely important, but kind of saying, there's other really great benefits to doing this. So you can kind of flip through, there's not a few more slides, I think there's 4 or 5 that just show some of the different imaging to really kind of let people know that, we're doing this for the wellness of the company as well as the wellness of you as individuals. Mindfulness eating, so really trying to get that messaging in. Another thing, and I think there's one more of these graphics, and then another thing we did, if you go to the next one, is we have we've had for a long time a safety program. It's called C-Card. And what it is if you see something and you do something, so it's not something that there was an incident, there was an accident. I saw water on the floor, it was a slip hazard, I cleaned it up to avoid that. You self-report that. And by doing that, then, we do a lot of recognition, and we engage our staff in saying, okay, I saw an unsafe condition or an unsafe behavior. I took action. I was empowered to take action. And the safety culture at Amgen is absolutely world-class. We have one of the lowest, if not the lowest, incident rates, recordable incident rates industry-wide, if not, more broadly. And so what we've done is taken those safety C-cards and added sustainability C-cards. I saw a leaking faucet, I reported it to facilities. I saw the lights were left on, I turned them off, and I actually suggested to facilities that we move to motion sensors. And we're getting some amazing engagement. And the point of this, again, is a big part of that 70% container loss is a cultural aspect, is you've really got to engage people on the journey and change the culture of your organization. So another one we did in addition to the C-cards, if you go to the next slide, is we've got these Bravo awards. So Bravos are something we've done for a long time. If you work with a team on a project, you send everyone $100 Bravo, and then you can redeem it towards gift cards, or, we've got a catalog. It's, most companies have some kind of a system like this. Now we have a specific Healthy Planet Bravo, and it's, it partners well with the C-card that you can give someone a Healthy Planet Bravo for an environmental C-card, or just independently. That, you can send someone a Healthy Planet Bravo. Good example is we had 18 people. I coordinated our participation in what's called the International Freezer Challenge to save energy with cold storage. Every person who participated in that freezer challenge to improve their cold storage practices, I sent them a Bravo, a Healthy Planet Bravo. Again, the point is to really reinforce that great environmental behavior, to bring people into the culture, to take them along in the journey. And the bottom line message, going back to kind of with the reusable containers, is there's never a single easy solution. You've really got to think things through. You've got to take a more holistic approach. You've got to engage your leadership. You've got to think about the culture piece. You've got to look at all of what could possibly go wrong, assume some of them will, and then just continue to surge forward, be willing to kind of adapt, adjust, and then just keep kind of pursuing forward in the journey, if you will. So with that, I think that's the end of my presentation, and I'd be happy to take questions, or I'm sure the others would too.
That's great, Joni. I really like your personalized approach, how you're reaching out to people and engaging them and trying to get their, boots on the ground feedback about what's happening around them. I think that shows an investment in their feedback, and that's what's really going to help move the needle and shift behavior and bring people into a different culture. So that was awesome. There was a question that came in about how many cups did you give out? Curious how that, what the scale of that reusable cup project looked like.
So 4,500 people on campus on a routine basis, so 4,500 cups. We do have more people coming on, but what we did is, and this was kind of a point of confusion for people, is what we looked at is people who had been badging in regularly between January and March, because we launched it last April. And we just said, if you're regularly on campus, that's how we came up with that 4,500. I have many more people saying, hey, do you have any more cups? And it's like they come to campus once a month or once every couple of weeks. And I kind of just have to explain them, well, this is really, it was just to kind of kick off the program. It was for people who are on a daily basis. I'm sorry, you're just going to have to, bring your own cup. They are for sale in our gift. Answer is 4,500 of them.
Nice. I want to highlight a quote that you just said: excellence should not suffer in the quest for perfection. And I think that that's a really important statement, and something that all three of you probably hold near and dear to heart as you're working through these different programs that you're working on. So a good reminder for anyone in this space trying to make an impactful change. There were a few questions in the chat, and I'm gonna swing back to Steve. There was actually a question from Kat McCarthy. She was curious to know about hear how you see scalability of the work that LeanPath is doing. Her question was, how do we reach small businesses in our communities? And do they not proportionally generate as much preventable waste? Or are there other tools to meet the measurements needs of businesses that are not fit for the tablet-based system?
Yeah, great, thank you. The first place that I was going to go there for typically a lighter operation would be the tablet-based tools that we provide. There are also manual tools that you can use out there. We would say that the most important thing to do is engage in measurement, right? If you want to have impact in food waste reduction, the key is to have some sort of a measurement process going. If you think that you are your volume is even too small to use our tablet-based solution, then you can take advantage of some manual tools that are out there. Typically, we find that there is much better results when you are engaged in an automated fashion, but understand the question and focus on some sort of a tool, whether that's an Excel sheet or others, to enforce that discipline of measurement is key.
Great. And then there was a similar but somewhat complementary question from Jenna. She was curious if you had, if you thought that it was better for this, for a specific type of food service, like set menus. So curious if you have a perspective on that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm seeing that question now. We work in all sectors of food service, so hospitality, healthcare, corporate units, sports and leisure, colleges and universities. So really all food service operations like that. Typically, the more overproduction sensitive environment that you have, the more waste that you're going to have, and the more impact that you will have from a tool like ours. Set menu, buffets, our tools will work fine for all of those. Again, typically, food service and hospitality account for 26% of global food waste worldwide. So there's a lot of waste in these operations, and there are, even with a set menu, there are all sorts of complexities related to just trying to predict the number of patrons that you're going to have on a certain day, right? Or what's the weather like, and all these various factors that are going to impact how many people come in, what people choose to eat, that sort of thing. And so, supply chain issues and things like that. So you have all kinds of variables which lead to waste in operations. So set menu, buffets, customized food preparation, our tools work for all of them.
It's a estimation and statistics game no matter what. So this is a tool to help hone in on that a little better.
Yeah.
Thank you. There was a question for Sue about reduction and why is tracking so important for reduction? And maybe this is something I'd extend to all of you if you'd like.
Perfect, thank you. I think that number one, if you've got a diversion program and let's say that you're diverting 85% and you move from disposables or compostables to durables, your 85% is going to drop and your upper management or your corporate goals are going to suffer. And so we went and devised this way to track so that your overall reduction. So Joni's got a goal to hit 75% reduction in her waste stream by, I think, 2027. That's a huge goal. And yet some of these items that could change her overall diversion, because that's a reduction goal, not a diversion goal. And so somehow she's got to be able to track, I've got to maintain my diversion goal, but I also have to have that reduction. And so somehow you have to figure out why and what you're reducing so that you can help quantify it. Because otherwise, especially corporate businesses, you're going to show a reduction in your annual public reports. That doesn't look good either. And so it's really important that for the overall to be able to quantify and then increase your diversion through the whole program. Anybody
Yeah, I
else?
think a simple,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think a simple way of putting it is, let's just say that we had used just disposable, non-recyclable, compostable cups in the past, and I switched to recyclable. I would still have something to measure because we would know how many of those recyclable cups we purchased. And I could say, look, and then we would assume, you know, we're recycling 60%, 80% of them. But if you make something go away, you can't measure it. And I need to show that I've achieved something. And so that's why, you know, that's absolutely critical to, you know, when you eliminate a waste stream, you've got to account for it, because those are not only the most important ways, you know, you're saving on disposal costs as well and purchasing costs, but it's gone forever. So it's just, as Sue pointed out, it's the hardest one often to really measure, you know, in a robust way.
I would add it's about discipline. It's the discipline of the process too, and then the visibility that brings. But you know, for us, you know, each case of each transaction that is tracked is a data point, and it's an image, and it's data that is flowing to our analytics program that is going to be analyzed and used by the culinary team and analyzed, you know, for opportunities to reduce. And so. And to Johnny's point, that, you know, these are points of measurement, right? And so if you're not accounting for each case of food waste in your operations, then you're losing opportunities, you know, to measure, to show your progress. And and Johnny got at this a little bit too, but there's an important part of the implementation process of this, which is to create a safe space, create a safe environment for people, right? And so you want to make sure that each person on your team is tracking every single case of waste in operations, because that's what I said. Those are the learning opportunities that are coming. If they bypass the trackers and are putting you know, excess food into the trash, then you're losing the value of the system, right? And so they have to feel like this is a safe. You know, understand that the value of the data that is being generated is part of a really important process, and they have to feel so the conversations need to be good. So if there's overproduction of filet mignon, as I mentioned before, and there's a conversation about that transaction, it should be one with a focus on positivity and held in a manner that is constructive, and not, you know, in a manner that is extremely negative, right? Because you want to provide the incentive to track every case of food waste in your operations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, that wraps up our questions. Sue, Steve, and Joni, thank you so much for your time, sharing some really awesome experiences, a lot of learnings. And to our attendees, thank you for joining us on this track. After this session, we'll be heading back to the main room. The link and the password are in the chat for you, as well as posted to the website. And thank you all. It's been a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Joni, the WebEx key link is in that live program. So that's just another link to the long URLs.
Thank you.
All righty. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.